I couldn't have become a twin if I hadn't been an only child. Because being an only child meant that I got bored. And when I got bored, I got nosy. So one day, in the house where I grew up down in South Florida with my mom and my grandmother, I found myself rooting through my mom's bookshelves. And what I found was a diary from the year 1979, which was the year I was born. So naturally, I turned to my birthday, and the entry I found there read simply, "They are born." Now, for most people, that would start the alarm bells going off and the questions rolling, right? Because, I mean, that's what kids do, is ask questions. You know, they are born. Who's they? Is that me? Am I a twin? Where's my twin? Was it a boy or a girl? Why aren't they here? Why am I here? Why? Instead, I kept those 3 words and the weight they carried to myself, more or less. While I didn't ask my mom or my grandmother what they meant, like some people might do, I would tell it to people like an anecdote at school. Isn't that funny? Isn't my mom weird? People were a little taken aback and pretty surprised that I didn't see what was blindingly obvious to them, that I had tripped over a life-altering secret, and that I wasn't an only child after all. I think it was just because it was too much for me to understand. I mean, I didn't think about what it would be like to receive an email from an unfamiliar address full of cryptic Pink Floyd lyrics and Thundercats references. I didn't think about what it would be like to have a partner in crime, someone to accompany me on the most meaningful adventures of my life. Instead, I buried the potency of those words with the power of denial, which is pretty darn powerful. And I didn't ask those questions that, looking back, seemed so urgent and essential. I think it was just too overwhelming for me. I was a shy, awkward kid. I didn't have a lot of friends. And I was really burrowed deep in this imaginary world I'd created to avoid my reality, which was living in a cramped house with a grandmother whose bitterness and paranoia took up all the room there was. And she was constantly casting all my relatives in this poor light, and they weren't around to defend themselves or let me draw my own conclusions. Luckily, my mom was a bastion of sense and goodness amidst all this craziness, and for a long time, my idea of family really didn't extend beyond me and her. I never really knew what to make of those families you saw on TV, with grandmothers who lived in quaint homesteads far but not too far away, baking cookies and dispensing wisdom, cousins with whom you could romp in backyards and woods, aunts and uncles who took you to ball games and museums, and siblings, your built-in best friends. I couldn't even begin to imagine what that would be like, so why try? I am a senior in college, I'm 21 years old, and I still haven't done anything with this information. But luckily, my boyfriend, who's now my husband, decided one day to ask my mom over AOL Instant Messenger, of all places, about what that diary entry meant. Years of suppression unraveled in one instant message. So this is what I found out. Yes, I did have a twin, a brother. And what had happened is that when my mom realized she couldn't afford to raise both of us, she decided to give him up for adoption. It sounds terrible, doesn't it? But the funny thing is that from the minute she told me, I understood, or at least I accepted it. I realized that you couldn't change the decision that was made. What's done was done. But what I could do was control what happened next. And it's funny, that next day when I was on the train going downtown to my internship, I was filled with fear and excitement looking at every 20-something guy on the train, not for the normal reasons. I was scrutinizing facial features and wanting to perform genetic swabs on the spot because I realized that any one of them could be him. Since I didn't know anything was possible, right? And it was just astounding to me. But I didn't know what to do next. It was hard because I didn't know what I was going to find. I mean, if just finding that diary alone was enough to, make me put off doing anything about it for 10 years until someone else did something about it. Even still, now that I knew that there was someone out there, it was still hard for me because I did not know what I was going to find. Maybe he didn't want to be found. Maybe he was sick. Maybe he was a criminal. Maybe he was dead. Maybe he was just a jerk. But love is a risk, and I realized after some time that the risk was worth it, and I'd wasted enough time already. So with my mom's help, I did the search through the adoption agency, gave them a few $100s, which at the time was a lot of money to me, and I sat back and I waited. Some weeks later, I got a strange email from some guy in New York. And by that evening, we were, yes, instant messaging into the wee hours of the night, talking about what movies and music we liked, where we grew up, the fact that we were both writers, and our families, which from that point would be forever joined. And that weekend, I got on a bus to New York City to go and meet him. But even then, I had a friend of mine chaperoning the encounter because it still didn't feel real. I still felt this was a cruel joke that someone was playing on me. So I found myself on a Manhattan street corner in Hell's Kitchen, waiting. And I felt just like that day on the subway, looking at all these guys walking past and realizing that any of them could be him. But what was different this time was when I looked to my right, and I saw this tall guy wearing all black, striding towards me with a huge backpack on. I realized that that was him. And then we hugged, and that was that. We were reunited. Then it was finally real. I think I picked up on being a twin relatively quick. It was really surprising to me how quickly those feelings of obligation and affection and protectiveness came on. Even the comfort to tease and be teased, and of course, jealousy. We got along pretty well from the start, but there's still a lot of similarities and differences that we had. I really had to learn how to change my whole way of looking at him. I had to understand that how he was who he was, and why that was okay. It was just hard to understand this whole other creature who was a part of me but different than me. And I really had to reorient, I found, my whole way of looking at things. And ultimately understand that the best way to show care and concern about somebody like him wasn't to try to change him or fix him, but just to accept and support him. And that, to me, was a huge difference. So we met our mom, and then we met his mom. And then the next unknown was our father and his side of the family. Truth be told, I really wanted none of it. I was not interested. It had been so easy growing up to cast him as the villain in absentia, even though it really wasn't the case. But he wore me down, and soon enough, we went out to try to find him, and we found him. In England, of all places. This is us finding him. So it turned out that I didn't just have a father and a brother, but I had aunts and uncles, 8 first cousins, another grandmother, and a brother and sister, half brother and sister, I just think of them as brother and sister, who are 2 of the most delightful people I've ever had the pleasure of meeting. And it's not to say this whole experience has been easy. It's definitely had its ups and downs. It can be hard constantly feeling you're trying to catch up to be relevant to somebody else's life. But when I sit back and I relax and I get over myself, I realize that no one cares. I mean, it's not like I've been there the whole time. It can never be like that. But I'm here now. And that's okay. And it's pretty good. And all things considered, it's pretty unremarkable, which in itself is actually pretty remarkable. What I also found was that as I discovered new family, I rediscovered my old family. So my grandmother died in 2009, and I ended up going back down to Florida to help settle her affairs. And on the second trip, I brought my brother with me so he could get a look at what my life was like before we knew each other. And what it turns out is that everything was different. None of it was the same. Everything had been reshaped in the light of a brother that I didn't used to have. And I found I looked at everything, even my grandmother who caused me so much grief, with more patience. And from there, we drove up to Virginia to see my mom's side of the family, where they were from. We stayed with her cousin and his wife, and they showed us around old family grave sites and homesteads. And what was stunning to me was how readily they welcomed us into their home. I mean, it felt like the Cracker Barrel gift card we got them as a thank you was almost an insult, because that level of hospitality and care that we got from them, it's just what you do for family. And it was stunning how alien it still was to me and how natural it was for them. So I went from a life of avoidance and fantasy to one of unrelenting reality. I went from having everything in my life defined by what I sought out to avoid family to being shaped by them in my interaction with them. And everything had been upended, but that was all right. It was actually pretty good. I got to start over while keeping everything I already had. I just got to understand it better, or maybe for the first time. So I don't want to end this by saying it's all thanks to my brother, because I don't want him to be a symbol. He's not. He's just my brother who plays banjo, drinks whiskey, smokes a little more than I'd like, but is still a better runner than me, never returns my calls, always orders biryani at an Indian restaurant, and makes up silly stories with me in the car. And that's the best part, is just being together like that. And I never knew that I could have that in my life. After all, I'm still becoming a twin. I'm still learning how to have a family. I'm still turning the pages, and the story keeps getting better and better.